Hello and welcome to REFACTR.TECH. I'm Ayodele Odubela. It's an honor to be giving this keynote and sharing with you ways to identify data weapons and tips on how to keep organizations accountable. I'm incredibly excited to inspire those who build machine learning models, and for those that don't, I'd like to let you in on a secret. Because algorithms are allowed to have this stranglehold on our lives, we must acknowledge that we'll never get to ML fairness without justice, demanding accountability, and major shifts in power. I, like many others, was interested in machine learning because of the really cool applications. But when we're working on automated decision systems, the consequences are real lives. The people who are already systemically marginalized tend to experience the worst implementations of AI in surveillance, housing, and healthcare. And researchers have outlined the many ways people can be harmed, people can experience harms related to AI systems. But it's even more important that you can identify the signs of data being utilized in ways that hurts people. I'm going to tell you the story about how I became an AI ethicist. I was a second-year grad student who managed to find a cool ML role at a drone company. Our drone packed some defensive heat and was bulletproof with a vast sensor array. And I worked on the sensor fusion aspect and specifically the weapon recognition system. I trained millimeter wave sensors like the ones in airport body scanners to recognize objects that were firearms. Our whole mission was to allow law enforcement to use this to determine if a suspect was armed before proceeding. It could also be used to event venues to sweep the crowd for weapons, and most importantly, the navigation system would censor aggressive stances, double check that someone was holding a firearm, and then automatically position itself in front of the firearm. Our intent was just to build something that would indiscriminately protect against gun violence. When we were working with law enforcement to develop this, we consistently got feedback that the drone should determine who is an officer and who is a suspect. While I kind of understand where they were coming from, that would defeat the purpose of building something purely to save lives. And they took huge issue with the stance detection system, despite the fact that the drone would also help them in case they were actually having a gun pointed at them. What I took away from this was that not all groups using technology believe in it. And not all groups using technology believe in using it in ways that benefit everyone. This experience also allowed me to have difficult conversations as a data scientist. What's our threshold for false positives? When a cop does shoot an unarmed person, what's our role in holding them accountable? These weren't questions my professors, mentors, or friends had to answer to. When I was a terrified grad student, and I'm glad I had this experience early, I knew that my code could mean life or death depending on how it was implemented. Shortly after, I got a scholarship to the Data for Black Lives conference, and nothing has been more important to me than fairness in AI systems. That event exposed me to two things. First, that this isn't an isolated issue, and second, that there are hundreds of people working to solve this problem and to make change. While data has been used as a weapon against those with less power and access, we can choose to fight this war. Let's talk about the right way to actually approach creating AI. AI systems rely heavily on large amounts of data, and that data is weaponized in certain systems. So if we were to create AI the correct way, we'd leverage Albert Einstein's way of thinking about problem solving. A lot more deep work and deep thinking is necessary on the front end of these projects, but we just gloss over that in industry. I think it's also important to reflect on the ways that we are oppressed or privileged. We need to reflect on this so we can address issues around power without feeling personally attacked. I'm a Black woman, which comes with its own intersectional issues like misogynoir, but I'm also able-bodied and heterosexual. There are various privileges I have that I can't easily recognize in systems, and that's why we need to work with both diverse teams and diverse groups of stakeholders or those with diverse professional experience when building AI. Data is a vehicle for that power. Look at the FANG companies that survived or were born out of the .com era. Look at what we consider successful organizations or those that are able to raise a lot of money. In recent years, they tend to be organizations that over-index on data science and machine learning. This has led us on a dangerous path because even though algorithms aren't new, we leverage machine learning to make these decisions faster than ever. With expert systems and written algorithms, we had mortgage lenders and social workers computing a risk score in person on paper. Now we do this at scale, but we also shield the code, training data, and the model from our customers. In my opinion, the secrecy and ability to unleash technology on groups without their consent is AI's original sin. Data and models themselves being proprietary, intellectual property, or legally secure are driving factors for massive user distrust in AI systems. I know there's a lot in this slide, but I want you to just read some of these for a moment. Have you seen technical systems or communities uphold any of these? Unfortunately, many of the technologies we build encode socially acceptable white supremacy. For example, much of AI assumes good intentions are enough, which leads us to solving fairness problems with unawareness techniques. Many think that if we just don't use race or gender as predictors, that we'll avoid all bias, but that's not the case. Addressing algorithmic bias is impossible without also addressing the power structures that incentivize organizations to deprioritize marginalized groups. The dubious ways that we tend to try new technologies on poor and uninformed groups before implementing them on a larger scale also shows that we really think of Black and brown communities as testing grounds for AI and new technology as a whole. Facebook's original motto to move fast and break things in reality looks more like moving fast, breaking people, and calling it progress. When AI was supposed to make our lives easier, we find employees of these innovative companies have to pee in bottles in order to not be punished for using the restroom. And we find that Silicon Valley residents were massively displaced because of the spike in housing costs driven by these organizations. This quote shows us that we have to flip our current tech life cycle on its head. We should leverage value-centered design as a lens to develop new machine learning. Organizations should provide appeals, recourse, and financial awards to those who've been harmed by their algorithms. What you're looking at now is the monthly report for Plantation's Hope and Experiment in British Guyana. From 1812, this handwritten tabular data was compiled and sent back to absentee slave owners living abroad. This data from an era where I would not be considered human, but property, has trickled into nearly every major industry impacted by capitalism and colonialism. And most public data sets, especially for facial recognition, are highly skewed towards white male faces. AI's history should be enough to convince us that our new goal with data science should be to create equity within our models. If we want to create equity overall, we have to understand that creating talks like this don't really help. I'm guilty of this myself, and as practitioners, we think that if we show the damage AI can cause, the engineers will care. But that's not the problem. It's not that engineers don't care. While many are unaware of the depth of these data biases, few people actually create algorithms with biased outcomes intentionally. In industry, the biggest problem is that our data science workflow just never allows for the kind of project assessment and impact assessments that needs to happen at the beginning of project development. If we don't shift organizational incentives away from measuring AI's ROI compared to their perceived overinvestment AI, we can't really create fair workflows. I've been in this position many times where stakeholders ask for new working algorithms within a week of project assignment, and this is no longer acceptable. The problem isn't just that the data set is biased. It's that we continue to use that biased data to model the future and make predictions about people, even though we know the risks. We must accept that there are historical artifacts in data that we can't change. Policing data is overwhelmingly biased by race and underreports sexual and domestic violence. Healthcare data is rarely representative of the communities that it's used on, and financial data skews towards those with access to banking, loans, and other financial systems. And often, women and minorities have lacked equal access to those systems. It's also important to talk about this in terms of harms and how people can be harmed by these algorithms. First, allocation harms are those that really just withhold resources or information. These systems that tend to deal with allocation harms, while they can understand if one ethnicity or gender is favored over another, we need to understand that this happens incredibly commonly. A real-life example being loan applications. They tend to pick white men as better candidates over other groups, and as a result, loans are withheld from those other groups. When we're looking at representational harms, Google image searches are a great example. If you search for images of professions with an equal or higher percentage of men than women, such as engineering, medicine, or if you search for the job title CEO, this is what you'll get. And we unfortunately tend to erase some people in other systems like gender classification systems. Over 90% of gender classifiers exclude trans and non-binary people. Looking to quality of service harms or not being able to receive the same service as others, a great example is commercial gender classifiers. There are much higher error rates for those who are women with dark skin, opposed to men with lighter skin tones. Unfortunately, if these systems work relatively well for men with everyone but women with dark skin, then they don't receive the same quality of service from the same tool. Stereotyping harms are incredibly common when we're talking about language. Turkish, for a great example, is genderless with only one pronoun. So when we convert our Turkish phrases on the left to English, we still see some of these stereotyping issues about who holds which roles. And degrading harms are those that may be technical or not, but end up degrading people or groups. Many times there are ties to historical bias and issues like racism, sexism, ageism, and more. These harms aren't just degrading, but while they give certain groups unfair criticism, contextually they can easily evoke feelings of shame, embarrassment, frustration, and shock amongst users. And this isn't just about the actual models, but sometimes in just how they're implemented. This makes it important to investigate the different sources of bias. And one of the scariest parts about algorithmic bias is that it can come from anywhere in the design and development process. It can also be apparent after we've rolled out an algorithm and it doesn't work, or we've rolled out a product and it doesn't work in a way that we initially expected. But consider the difficulties involved in collecting representative data. If you want to collect data from 2 gender identities, 5 different age groups, and 10 different global regions, you're looking at 100 different distinct groups to collect data from. While daunting, we have to accept that sometimes this kind of data collection and these data-heavy tasks are required for creating fair outcomes. The world as we've inherited it generates data, but much of that is representative of our biases and the one of the people who develop these systems. When we take bits of data from sources like the internet without ensuring we represent different groups of people, we not only deal with representation bias, but historical biases about how we feel about those groups. During the building and implementation process, we can run into various issues where ML models learn the wrong things. Maybe we just learn the stereotypes and none of the important things. We can also make errors during the evaluation process, which are tricky to identify because it's subjective and conducted by humans. To understand bias in data collection, consider that labeled data is necessary and is the necessary starting point for supervised machine learning. We have to have labels for each of our rows in order for certain algorithms to perform very well. And while many tech companies have been criticized for using low-wage workers to do these tedious tasks, we should think about how variations in the location and geography of these labelers might skew a machine learning model. If you worked for Coke in this scenario and wanted to understand online sentiment related to your product, you might have a hard time. Demographics and geography make a huge difference in how we speak and can influence how training data for machine learning is created. In Quebec, it's actually illegal for a woman to change her last name to her husband's and has been since 1981, or vice versa. And changing one's name in the province is notoriously hard, but this poses a huge problem for people in Montreal who fill out forms elsewhere. The maiden name concept may be foreign, and many tools that use last name to associate families will not work for families in Quebec. This is the standard machine learning development lifecycle most companies abide by, but this process we've adopted and continue to teach gives no time or consideration for data audits, discovering biases and sensitive issues, modeling potential impact of AI systems, or even collecting thoughts around mitigating the harm we will inevitably cause. So it's important that you know there's lots of things we can do to stop white supremacy from thriving in our systems, even if we can't simply remove it from our data. The first step is identification. Once we're able to identify historical artifacts, we can work with social scientists to understand how groups, including intersectional groups, might be impacted by the tools we're working on. So things to look out for. Organizations that just say it's proprietary. This is pretty common for most tech companies at this point, but watch out for groups that hesitate when open data is mentioned. They're happy to keep their work private to avoid outside scrutiny. Companies notorious about this have been Northpoint, the company that produces the Compass recidivism algorithm, and Clarify, who work to recognize people in different photos and sell that to police departments and government agencies. Tech users also have the difficult task of reading through all of the rules when they're signing up for a new service. On average, you have to read through 16.9 different pages, and sometimes these are spread across different documents. So dubious consent about how your data was used and collected is a major red flag. Deploying to less powerful communities first. Like I mentioned earlier, and an example covered in documentaries like Coded Bias, residents of a Brooklyn building were subjected to facial recognition tech made to replace their key fobs as a way to enter their building. They said their landlord said the goal of this was to implement new, stronger security tools, but covertly use this to surveil tenants. They were rightfully angry that these tools weren't really respective to their biometric data or privacy. And it is a myth that users do not care about privacy, as we've seen, especially in the recent years. When California passed new data privacy laws, the impression was that the tech industry kind of split into two camps. There were some organizations like Microsoft, Apple, and Salesforce who were actually in favor of GDPR-style regulation in the states, while others such as Google and Facebook saw the new rules as a threat to their advertising businesses. While these privacy regulations weren't AI-specific, data privacy is on the path towards responsible AI, and lobbying against these kinds of regulations tells you a little bit about the organization and what kinds of openness and the kind of transparency they're willing to have with users. Overhyping is one of the biggest issues in AI systems because we claim AI can do certain things with no science to back it up. A great example of this is emotion detection. Let the record show that human emotions cannot be detected via voice or computer vision. Simply stated, this entirety of this new booming market is based on a lie. We can detect many proxies that we think are correlated to emotion, but the nuance and complexity of humans makes this actually impossible. It's easy to lie about this because we don't have ground truth data or known to be factual data about how someone feels in time gaps spanning mere seconds. There are so many differences in nationality, geography, cultural norms around expressing emotion that this is a flawed avenue to even pursue the use of AI. AI systems used to analyze faces, bodies, and gaits are dangerous digital revivals of the discredited early 19th and 20th century pseudoscience of physiognomy, where we just make predictions or assumptions about a person's character based solely on their outward appearance. So emotion detection is snake oil. No science, just vibes. There are often wild claims that organizations make that aren't really founded, not just by science, but they don't really provide any of the resources or provide specific metrics other than those that are garnered to gain clicks or gain attraction. This kind of showworthiness or showmanship is really common with AI systems, but we shouldn't let it fool us. Okay. So how do you become a champion of ethical AI? When we're envisioning and defining new ways to build ML, we have to make major structural changes to this workflow. And these changes need to support methods that mitigate bias. So start thinking about which principles are most important to your organization. Is it more important that a product is fair, or is it more important that you're taking accountability for a product you've already created? Is it important that you're transparent in your communications and that you temper expectations, provide caveats, and state the limitations? Or is it more important that a specific model is explainable? These are all going to be different for every group and every team, but start thinking about which principle to lead with, or principles. We also need widespread organizational support, so ensuring that multiple teams take responsible AI seriously is key. It's not just leadership and programmers who need to buy in, but project managers who guide the pace and development of AI systems. It also takes UX researchers who know how to perform preferability tests for AI. We can design better products by understanding the needs of our users and those directly impacted by our products alike by involving these stakeholders in the development process. We should also start to think about intersectional groups in context to our domain. So in this context for facial recognition, just as you saw as far as the disparate outcomes, darker skinned women need to be considered and are specifically relevant for facial recognition. Older women, disabled racial minorities, gender nonconforming, neurodiverse people, and ethnic caste are really relevant for hiring systems. We should also rely on existing research. So consider search, for example. There's been a lot of work done to understand the impact and biases of how we optimize search results. Researchers like Dr. Sophia Noble and Tawana Petty have exposed how search results are selected based on the highest chance of a user clicking a link. But this has led to disparate outcomes, specifically when we're talking about racial searches. If you're working in search, don't get overexcited about all of the other AI research that may be exciting and overwhelming, but maybe start to look specifically for ethical AI resources in your context and domain. We also have a massive need for standardizing the documentation process. Across domains, industries, and single organizations, the way we document data, decisions, and outcomes of AI systems is far from standard. This leads to competing vocabulary and frequent misunderstandings when collaborating on building new algorithms. Because of these challenges, we need a standard documentation plan in organizations so that enterprises working on dozens of AI projects at once can easily compare them and test for sensitive issues. Technically, this makes the debugging aspect far easier for engineers as well. We also need to structure the design and problem definition stages. What this means is including things like qualitative methods and project templates for engineers. We also need development checklists that help them on the actual coding path that they can use side by side. We can also create processes for document review, not just for data documentation, but for auditing purposes. While attending the Data for Black Lives conference, I heard a panel titled, "We Are the Leaders We've Been Looking For." And this panel changed my mind about the role I was going to play in organizing for algorithmic accountability. There are no limits to pushing for data justice. We can all contribute to the movement to eradicate data weapons. Those of us in technical organizations can question management, fight to work with those in the humanities and behavioral sciences as well. You can also suggest organizational changes that support the lives of marginalized people by prioritizing marginalized people. Argue that your KPIs should be tied to delivering products that don't reinforce the status quo. Aim to develop AI systems in ways that consider input from potential users and those indirectly impacted by your system. At the core, ethical issues in AI boil down to capitalism. Yes, there's skewed data and biased engineers, but as long as incentives are tied to profit and revenue before fairness and equity creation, the packages, tools, and services we offer in responsible AI can't make real change. In recent years, you may have heard of data being referenced to as the new oil. I'd argue it's less the new oil and more the new nuclear bomb. There's a chance to do immense damage, and despite our optimism, that's the path we're headed down. So what do we need to do at a minimum technical level to get to a better place? At the bare minimum, Organizations need to consider doing algorithmic impact assessments for every new project and for current projects. So yes, for legacy systems, going back and attempting to understand how you've been able to impact the world and impact your users, and even those downstream who did not actually consent to using your software. We can also work on data inspection and nutrition labeling. I love this because it gives us certain alerts about the completeness of a data set and the composition, as well as different details about the data set, like if it's been under quality review, or if it's commercially licensed, or how often it's refreshed, like if that's weekly, quarterly, or annually. Improved documentation is also a bare minimum in that we need to create data sheets for every single data set we're working with, or every aggregation of data we're working with. We need to create model cards for every single model we create, regardless of how tedious a task that may appear to be. And we need to communicate these limitations transparently. This is crucial because if we continue to do all of the checks and test for fairness and attempt to actually create equity with our products, and we fall short in communicating them, then all of that work ends up being for nothing. The same way that tech companies lobby for policy that allows them to build surveillance tools and underpay employees by calling them contractors, we can work to impact policy that reduces systemic white supremacy. This can be boycotting products, petitions, working with policymakers on bills. We have a long way to go to get to at least the GDPR in the United States, but beyond that, we have to accept language around technology that opens the door for non-technical contributors and addresses the root cause of algorithmic harm. The best thing that technologists can do is advocate fiercely for user appeals processes for AI systems and advocate for financial recourse for harm to users. True accountability is flimsy without methods for users to appeal a decision, and in the case an algorithm was wrong, we must find ways to compensate users proportionate to the amount of harm they faced. If nothing else, this is a call to everyone adjacent to AI. You may be in development, a technical writing, or in the cloud, but you too can improve this space. The group of people currently charged with creating AI are a sea of dudes from upper middle class backgrounds with little insight or adequate consideration to the marginalized groups who can be harmed. We don't need more problem solvers, we need system breakers. We need those willing to go against the grain to fix problems data weapons have caused. It's okay if you don't know the underlying math. You need to use your passion to drive policy efforts and measures to keep companies that create AI accountable. Thank you so much for listening. You can find me on the internet at DataSciBay or on my website, AyodeleOdubela.com. If you're interested, you can also learn more about data weapons and algorithmic bias at EthicalAIChampions.com. Thank you.